Thanks everyone for that brief introduction and for coming to this Student Voting Network meeting tonight. Tonight we're going to be hearing kind of about working in the legislative workspace. We have our guest speaker, Collin McNamara, who I have had the privilege of going to class with and getting to know a little bit at UW-Stevens Point. I will turn it over to him to introduce himself and then to Sophie to ask some questions about the line of work that he does.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Roy, for that introduction. My name is Collin McNamara, and I am a recent alumni of the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And I graduated in December of 2022 with my degree in political science, as well as right now I am currently a candidate for the Wisconsin State Senate in Senate District 24 in Wisconsin, which currently encompasses central Wisconsin as well as part of western Wisconsin.
Thank you for that introduction, Collin. So we have a few questions for you as we wait for other panelists to come up. But how did you know that you wanted to work in legislature, and how did you start?
Sure. So I actually got my start. I was one of those as my family called me a nerdy kid, but I was always pretty certain I knew what I wanted to do with politics and helping people since I was probably 8 or so. And I've been helping out on campaigns since I was about 14 or so. And then when I got to campus, that's really when I started helping on campaigns, ranging from a couple of local races, being campaign manager for a mayoral race last year, to volunteering on gubernatorial races, US Senate races, presidential campaigns. You name it, I've pretty much had experience on a campaign, either from a local all the way up to a national level. How did I know that I wanted to run? For me, this year, really, it solidified that I wanted to help people. And there was one experience that really sticks out to me that really told me that I had to run for office. And that was, I was talking with some coworkers and they told me that they had lost faith in their government and that that it doesn't really matter who we elect because at the end of the day, every politician is just the same. And I don't really subscribe to that way of thinking. And I realized that I want them to be able to believe in their leaders again. And by stepping up to do that, I want them to be able to believe in the process again and democracy again. And so you realize that it's a much larger issue the more that you're out talking with people, that there has kind of been an erosion in trust in government. And so running for office and showing that, voting matters and it matters who we elect and that it doesn't always have to be this way. Like it doesn't have to be politics doesn't have to be a blood sport. We can actually get things done and work together.
Perfect. Thank you. And what does a typical day look like for you?
So a typical day for me can range anywhere from working at my full-time job or working on campaign related stuff, or on most days, usually working at my job and then coming home and either sending emails or working on reaching out to donor list or other potential candidates or coordinating with county parties or things, anything you name it, campaign related, that could happen on a daily basis. And occasionally you try and work in a little bit of free time to either watch TV or just relax a little bit.
Got it. Are there any classes you took during your time at UW that maybe inspired your career other than your interests before you went to college?
Sure. Yeah. So classes that inspired me really at UW Stevens Point was actually one of my last semesters. I took a constitutional law class, and that was a lot of fun because we went through Supreme Court cases ranging all the way back to the beginning of the Supreme Court to the modern day, and we looked at them and we analyzed them. And basically, it was how justify this ruling? How did you understand it? What philosophy did they use to reach this ruling? In addition to that, I also did take a political theory course, which was much more of a zoomed out approach in how we approach and how we got to like kind of this point So basically, different ways to approach different issues and thinking about it, whether it's like through like a classical sense or a realist sense, trying to figure out all of those different things was actually a lot more eye-opening than I thought. Kind of challenging because it's a lot more of an abstract, apply it yourself kind of way. But I would say that those two classes were some of my favorites.
Got it. And could you share the best and worst parts of your job?
Sure. So, one of my favorite things to do is going out and talking with folks, whether it's in my local community or right now, the current district that I'm running in ranges all the way from central Wisconsin all the way over to western Wisconsin. So, we go from Stevens Point in central Wisconsin all the way over to La Crosse, which is about 2.5 hours away. So, I have a lot of opportunities to talk with a lot of different folks, and so I would say that's my favorite part. My one of the most challenging parts, I would definitely say, is, sometimes not so much the commute, but definitely after your 3rd or so event, sometimes sitting in the car, you're like, "Alright, I wish I was just at the event. I wish I was just there." But I would say the other challenging part is like days like the past couple of days where it's very cold. So you're out there talking with folks and it's in the negatives. Those are going to be some of your more challenging days for sure.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. It's been super cold here in Virginia too, so I can definitely see that being difficult for you. What are the most important skills in your job? Do you think you developed them in college, or did you like learn them on the job?
So in my time in college, I served in the Student Government Association, ranging from positions from being 2 terms in the Senate to being a president and finishing my time as the Chief Justice, the head justice, as we called it. And so I would say those positions really did help solidify a lot of skills and helped teach me the ways of compromising, the ways of trying to get legislation through negotiations, and ultimately knowing how to do constituent services and all of that was definitely very honed in on when I was in college. But some of the main characteristics or skills that I was taught was being organized, making sure you have your notes, making sure you know what you're going to say ahead of time. I am a person who does like to, have an idea of what I'm kind of starting with and where the goal is for a meeting or for any kind of event I go to. I like to know kind of some of the details or at least um, know what type of event you're going to because sometimes it's a town hall and your goal is to answer questions. Sometimes it's a listening session and your goal is to listen. So there are different kind of things like that, but ultimately I would say some of the most important ones were skills that you kind of learn as you grow up. So things like honesty, integrity, empathy, respect, and hard work is, I mean, no one gets into a political or a legislative role without some sense of like personal ambition and knowing that you have to work really hard because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to push yourself to do those things. Like there are days where you're right. After working 10 hours, you probably don't want to make a donor phone call, but you do it. And it's about it's about that personal ambition. It's about that hard work. And it's about being able to like truly understand what people are going through. You may not have gone through it yourself, but at least trying to show that, I'm here, I'm listening, and I care about what you were saying. But also, I think something we can all agree on in politics is we need to start being more honest with ourselves, whether that as a candidate talking to potential voters, whether that is as an elected official. Um, One of the biggest things I hear talking with young people is that during a campaign, they candidate promises like the moon and stars, like all of these amazing things are going to get done and then you get into office and some of it gets done, some of it's not exactly happens the way that they said it was going to, and people become disillusioned with the process. So I think kind of being upfront right off the bat, that's where it really matters.
Very insightful. Thank you. What would you say is the most important part of your work?
Well, it's kind of hard to put that into words, but I would say the most important part is knowing that every kind of decision, because I'm not in office yet, but as I'm campaigning, is knowing that these decisions are impacting people, knowing what you're saying is impacting people, and knowing that at the end of the day, like there's no training exercise for what you can and can't do, and there's no training exercise to really teach you that every decision that you're going to make is going to impact people's lives. And I think that that's a sense that you really have to keep an eye on and make sure that you know that you're not going to be always the smartest person in the room. You're not going to be, you're not going to have every answer to every question. And so that's where you have to know how to ask the question and know that you're going to have to put in the work to find answers.
Definitely. Is there something you wish you would have known about this space before you started this position or just campaigning in general?
I think that I had some people who were very honest with me right off the bat as I was kind of thinking about running for office, about the amount of hard work it was going to take, about the days that you'd go with little to no sleep to try and get things done. But I would say that the number one thing is well, the first one would definitely be that if you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing something wrong. And I know that sounds like a really cliche phrase to think about, but it's true. At every point where I'm starting a new phase of the campaign, that's something that I get told by advisors or by people who have done it before is if you're comfortable, chances are you're doing something wrong or you're not thinking about it fully. Um, so you want to make sure that you're going to get comfortable being uncomfortable very quickly. I've always kind of been an extroverted person. And so talking with people has always come a little bit easier to me. But knowing that, that you're going to be talking a lot and kind of the number one thing that I always get told after an event is that, wow, you spoke like genuinely, like it doesn't matter which room I go into, you're speaking genuinely. And I think that's something that you don't really get prepared for. It's just something you do. You have to know how to walk into a room and just say what you're saying.
Yeah, kind of related to that. I know you mentioned this earlier, but a lot of people have distrust in the government or elected officials right now. What is your take on this? How can we make this better? Do you think this is valid?
I think it is valid. And well, let me rephrase. I think it's valid to a point. One, we have kind of this sense that our politicians have to be perfect, that there is this perfect candidate, there is this perfect legislator, there's this perfect president, whatever it may be. There's this perfect person out there who's going to embody every value that we have, that's going to embody like the perfect age, the perfect like requirements, any stipulation you put out there, that there's this perfect candidate. And at the end of the day, every politician is also just a person. And I think that that's one thing that as elected officials, as candidates, and as voters that we need to take into consideration is we're people. Like at the end of the day, whether I'm elected or I'm not, I'm still going to be someone's son. I'm still going to be someone's brother. Like that's how, or someone's grandson. That's how these things have to work. And so I would say that yes, it is founded to a point, and ways to kind of start addressing it is, like I mentioned earlier, is saying what you're saying, going, not giving, like, not making promises you're not going to be able to keep, not giving false hope to what can actually happen. So maybe instead of, and I know this doesn't sound super great when you're out campaigning, is instead of saying that we're going to get this huge thing done, say, you know what, we're going to get this piece of it done. we're going to get this done. We're going to get this done. And I think that those small steps turn into those bigger steps to bigger goals. So for example, during my time at UW Stevens Point I was president during the 2020 election, and we knew with COVID, it was going to be a big mail-in year. We were going to have those strong senses of people who don't want to turn out to the polls, but still want to vote. So I worked to get an absentee ballot box, and then we worked to get student flexibility days on election. Those things separately helped boost student turnout. But if you combine those things, that really makes an impact on student voter turnout. And coupled with all of these other groups that were doing more engagement for students as well, created a high turnout election at a low turnout point in time. And so I would say that showing people what matters and showing that we can take steps, and small steps sometimes are okay to take as well. Now, I'm not saying by any means that we shouldn't try and we should slow play everything and stuff like that. We can take big swings, but we have to be okay with compromising. We have to be okay with stuff like that. And I would also say that something else is that, especially talking with the voters in this area, is people are tired of running to the extremes. And right now it's kind of, there's governing a lot by the extremes of whichever party has control, they're going to get whatever they want, and the other party doesn't matter. We do have divided government for like a reason. And it does sometimes work if people are willing to work together and put politics aside to do the right thing. So it is founded, and there are a few ways that we can start bringing it back. But I also think that one of the biggest things is bringing down the temperature in our politics. Politics has become so hostile. And the number one question that I've been asked is, are you nuts for running for office? And all of that kind of stuff that comes with it. I've never thought about it that way, but from an outside looking in perspective, I can see how it may look like that, because you turn on the TV and all you see are politicians attacking each other, or an ad attacking a politician or a candidate or governing official. And we have to hold each other accountable, absolutely. But there comes a point where we also have to be like, a fact is a fact, and stick to the records. And not lying to voters, not lying to young people, not trying to disillusion them, and make stuff up as you go along.
Yes, thank you for those points. Roy, do we have our second guest speaker?
Yes, we do.
Okay, do we want to introduce?
Yeah, Sophie, I'll leave it up to you if you want to go back and ask questions, or just continue on and then kind of go back at the end and hit some of the other questions. Whichever works best for you.
Maybe we continue, but could we start with an introduction, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for joining us, Merleyn. If you want to kind of introduce yourself to the group, and then we're just asking some questions about your line of work, and what you like about it, don't like about it, the skills, that type of thing.
Sure. Well, first I want to start my introduction with 1,000 apologies for showing up late. I had some crazy technical difficulties. This is what I get for not Zooming as often as I used to, so I apologize. But I'm super excited and happy to be here. I am Merleyn, former Representative Merleyn Bell from the state of Oklahoma. I now live in Reno, Nevada, where I've lived since August of 2022. After completing 4 years serving in the Oklahoma State Legislature, I moved to Reno and was lucky enough to connect with the Speaker of the State Assembly here in Reno, Steve Yeager, and his team. It was his first year as Speaker, so I sort of joined this, excited ragtag team of individuals who were working there in the Speaker's office together, and served as a policy advisor to the Speaker and to the rest of the Democratic caucus here in Nevada. So I, for once, having come from a minority, a super minority serving in Oklahoma, I actually got to work on some policy and help pass some bills, which was really exciting. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Looking forward to our discussion, and thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we all relate to the Zoom problems. I have gone through it myself, so we get it. We were just going through a few questions, and I think we can just continue, and then we were planning to take a few audience questions. So my next question is, what advice would you give to a student who wants to go into your field of work?
Collin, have you already answered this one?
I have now, no.
Oh, I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I would say the first thing is do it. If you think that you want to run for office and you think that you're qualified, but you don't really know how, do it. Try and put your team together, reach out to people who you may know or anything like that, and do it. I think that you absolutely should. And the most basic qualification that you need to have to run for office is that you care about your community and you can vote. I'd say, so if you want to run for office, you should do it. And if you don't know where to start, then I'm more than happy to make a connection and we can definitely talk about it. I talk to young people all the time who say, well, I want to, but I don't know how. Well, that's why we make connections, and that's why we talk about things like this. So do it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with Collin more. I think if you even have an inkling that you want to run for office, then you're the kind of person who should. Because, you know, I have talked to so many people over the last several years since I ran who said, I just don't know how you could do that. I could never do that. And some of them are wrong, you know, because they just don't feel like they have that confidence, the confidence that they would need to run. I certainly didn't before I took the plunge. But then there are other people who might actually be right. You know, they're just not well suited. They don't like public speaking. They don't like being in front of crowds of people. They don't like having to answer things on the spot. You know, all these things might make you really uncomfortable just based on who you are and what your personality is. And I certainly don't want people feeling like they have to, like being in politics only means running for office. Because what I found having transitioned last year from being a very forward-facing participant in the process to being somebody in a very tiny, like 10 by 10 room looking at screens of committee meetings for 12 hours a day, is that was almost as fun, if not more fun to me, like being deeply involved in the policy process. And I was much more deeply involved in doing that when I wasn't the person out front who was running and campaigning and getting elected and, you know, going to all of the functions and, you know, like doing all the things, being in my tiny realm and really being able to dive in on education policy and healthcare policy and things like that is arguably just as important and just as fun. So, you know, I think that there are all sorts of places. It's just like any other industry or business. There are places for you to plug in that would really suit you, even if it's not just about being the candidate on the walk card. And I think that's really important and something that I wish I had known maybe even before I ran for office. I mean, I feel like, you know, I was voted most likely to win an Oscar in high school, just saying. So the performative aspect of it for me felt very natural and fun and exciting. But it's not necessarily the be all and end all to politics or to policy. So I feel like that's important for people to keep in mind too.
Got it. I see that Alicia has a question in chat. By the way, I'm not sure if I said this. If any of you have questions, you can unmute, raise your hand, type in chat, and we can get them asked. But Alicia is asking, how much does it cost to run for office?
The That is a good question, and I would say it definitely does depend on the race, and where you live. So for example, in some of the more rural areas of my district, that could either, I have local candidates who say, oh, I spent maybe about a couple $100 on some mailings and I was able to win. Or you talk to some of the more urban people and you hear, well, I spent about $10,000 on my school board race. And so you kind of get that different feeling as you go along. Looking through finance reports, there are some races that for like legislative offices or for in the state of Wisconsin where they easily start getting up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars race and millions of dollars. We just had our most expensive Supreme Court race in the history of our state. And so politics is expensive, and you spend a lot more time, depending on what office you're running for, than I necessarily care to admit, trying to raise money. um, and it's no one's favorite part. But there are aspects, and I would say politics is expensive, but it's also, you can raise that money because you start building up that message. The key is finding a message you believe in.
Yeah, I think I found it interesting just to add on to what Colin's already said about the cost that I've worked now in 2 state legislatures, and when I ran for office, I never spent more than about $50,000 and raised all of that money, a large chunk of it maybe in the last like 3 months of a year-long campaign when things like really started heating up, and that's naturally when people feel like they should give, like you're doing all of the work and sort of um, managing things a lot earlier than people start engaging with you in the campaign cycle. But when I moved to Nevada, I again went through those financial reports just like Colin, curiosity to see what other people were spending, and people who were in the same position as me but in a different state were spending $500,000 with TV ads and like all of the and billboards and all of this stuff that I was just like for the same office. And ironically they get paid way less in Nevada and it's only every other year. So they were spending just like astronomical amounts of money, but it does just kind of depend on what the race and the seat dictates. Like Colin said, you may be able to spend hundreds of dollars instead of thousands if you don't have an opponent or you live in a very solidly red or blue district. It really just depends. But yeah, the numbers can be sort of mind-blowing and very overwhelming, but those are also there's also a different scale. So I wouldn't have had to raise $500,000 in Oklahoma, whereas in Nevada, it's very much expected that that's how much you're going to raise because they have much more infrastructure here and people working on campaigns and all of that jazz. So it really just depends. So yeah.
Very insightful. I've honestly never really thought about this. So thank you both. And Cassie asks in chat, if you want to work on a legislative staff, how do you get started in finding position? Maybe especially for college students who have just graduated.
So I would say one of the ways that you can start by trying to figure out which offices have openings and different things like that is talking with your local representative. Even if they don't have openings in their staff, they can point you to their colleagues who may have an opening in their office. Other ways are just kind of looking it up. Most states have like a centralized like government agency kind of thing, or you apply to the caucus you want to work for too. That's an option as well. So if you don't know who you want to work for, but you're looking for any Democratic legislator or any Republican legislator, just kind of, you can send in your resume and they can try and help place you as needed and different things like that. So talking with local leaders, talking sometimes even with your school, because they're usually connected to the legislature in some way, or they know different offices. Or their other way is also the more boots on the ground approach, I would say, is cold calling the offices and saying, hey, do you have any openings, or knowing when the hiring cycle kind of is, whether that's at the end of the session, more in like the March, April timeframe, or that could be in like the November timeframe. Or working on a campaign is great because then you can kind of see who's starting off their term very quickly in the November, December, and who's going to be looking for staff. So there's a couple of different options.
Yeah, I'd add that in my experience, I wish it weren't this way. But it's much more organic. It's you sometimes it's literally like you were the person who was there in the room and you're the one who showed up to all the events, or you offered your help and offered it at the right time to the right person. So I'd say the sooner you can start building your network of people before you and I've experienced this after sort of like trying to transition from doing strictly political work to just getting on LinkedIn and Indeed and trying to find jobs myself. It's like, oh, I should probably really network my connections and start telling people what I'm interested in doing before it's time to do it. Because in most cases, what I found is that they'll and when I was a legislative member, it was like I had somebody from my campaign in mind that I thought would be good to take with me to the Capitol. It turns out I was wrong about that, and it wasn't a good fit, which is fine, but I didn't know anybody else. I had been working with this one person for so long that I thought, well, this is going to naturally be a really good fit for both of us. So I think it really is, even if it's just hedging your bets to build that network of people who that may know somebody else who knows that that rep who just got elected is now looking for somebody to work with them in their office.
Got it. Thank you guys. Alicia has another question in chat. What does democracy mean to you? Can we start with Collin, maybe?
Oh, that's we were doing some good we were doing some like easy ones compared to that one. I would say democracy to me is the opportunity to really have a voice in what is going on. In a lot of other countries, they do not have the same opportunities to question their leaders, to run for office themselves, and to do all those different things that we sometimes take for granted here in the United States. So I would say democracy to me is about choice, it's about freedom, and it's about the ability to participate. And I always go back to to two quotes whenever I really start like thinking back on it. Is the first is from de Tocqueville, where he referred to the United States as the great experiment in self-government. And I would say that is one of the first things that I really think about, is that we have to do everything we can to defend the great experiment, to make sure that we're putting the right people up there, that we are participating to the fullest extent possible and not sitting out a single election. Even if you're not 100% sure on your candidates, doing your homework and really going out there and voting every single election. This is my sixth, I think, ish year or so of voting, and I have made every primary for the spring, for the fall, for all of them. I've made every general election, even if that meant that I had to do absentee ballots because I was working on a campaign and I was not going to be home on election day. And the other quote I think about is actually just from Ben Franklin, where he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And the "if you can keep it" part is what really sticks with me, is that it takes work. It does take a lot of work to do it. And I know it can be exhausting, but democracy is, as we often hear, is not a spectator sport, and it can be exhausting and it puts up a fight. And so you have to be willing to outwork the other people in the room. But democracy to me is about hope, and it's about that freedom to participate and to choose.
Oh, I couldn't have said any of that any better, Collin. That was amazing. It's so inspiring to hear you talk about being an active participant, because I feel like that's so much of what's missing in the desire that we have to keep democracy. Like, it is work, but it often reminds me of like exercise, which I have no authority to speak on, by the way. So this is why it resonates so much with me, because every time I restart an exercise regime, I'm like, oh God, if I had just been more consistent at this, like if I had just been going to yoga and like doing steady workouts, you know, incrementally, maybe it wouldn't be so painful, right? But I think we sort of, I think a lot of people view democracy and government and that responsibility that we all share together as more of a like set it and forget it, you know, to where it's like, well, if it's working, then I don't have to be involved and I don't really want to, and I don't need to think about it. But that civic engagement, I think, is so critical to making sure that we can do what Franklin said about keeping it and maintaining it. But it does take that maintenance. It takes active participation to say, hey, aren't we supposed to have a law in the books that does this and we're not doing it? Like, what's that? You know, like we need to hold people accountable and question things when we see them. I mean, I think that's why when people talk about advocating and speaking truth to like your legislator or other elected leaders, it's often noted like, hey, if you can get 6 or 8 people together to start making noise about this one thing, that's going to be enough for the person that you're going to speak to be like, whoa, I mean, okay, so this is like a thing, you know, like I need to start paying attention now, because there's so little accountability in the political and policymaking process right now. And in some ways it's structured that way. Like I could, you know, sort of get on a soapbox about that when it comes to Oklahoma and some of the things that I experienced that are very closed door and very sort of like fly by night in terms of decision making and policy making. But I think the reason why they're still that way is because there's not enough people saying, no, we're involved in this too, and we want to say, and you have to let us participate in the process because it's our process. So I think that ownership, like democracy, is something that I feel very attached to, and like something that I have to work for, not something that has to work for me, if that makes sense. You know, it's an equal partnership. It's not just something that's guaranteed. And I think we all see that right now more than ever, unfortunately.
Thank you both for your answers. Very thoughtful. Sani is asking, what are your future goals? Can we start with Merleyn?
Oh, future goals. Well, I will say that this year for sure, I think when I first came on, I heard Collin saying something about, you know, sort of about that accountability piece and about um, um, believing people when they show you who they are and holding them accountable if that person and those decisions that they're making are not, you know, as favorable as we'd like them to be, or as equitable as we'd like them to be. I could just totally be making that up, Collin, but it reminds me that I've been working on a podcast project with a fellow elected official from my hometown, Lauren Schuler, who also works for the Campus Vote Project. And we had a discussion the other day about resolutions for just the next year, because 2024 is such a big year. And that was my big resolution, that like now I tend to take a very nuanced view of things when it comes to the democratic process, like small d democratic process. But I think that we're in such a place right now that my goal, at least for this upcoming year, is to take things at face value and believe people when they show me who they are or what they believe in the first time, instead of, well, you know, maybe they voted for that because of whatever. No, I think this year is the year for us to have really frank conversations and probably really difficult conversations about whether we can maintain our republic and what that means, and what we do to hold people accountable when they don't seem to be on that same path with us. Because I feel like it's, we're at this really critical place where beyond 2024, the way that we go about making policy decisions at all levels will be affected by some of the decisions that get made this year. And not just the presidential election, by the way, although that's what comes to mind first. But in a lot of ways, there is a lot going on in our state legislatures across the country that could have really profound impacts for many, many years to come. So I'm trying personally to keep my ear to the ground enough and listen and believe people enough to do what I need to do to hold them accountable, even if it means having those difficult conversations and making difficult decisions about who I align myself with and what policies, decisions I align myself with and which ones I don't. Which is probably a little bit more difficult, like not being there on the ground as much as I was before. But I feel like, again, that's part of my civic duty, is to, monitor things and hold people accountable and encourage other people I know to do the same thing. So that's my goal, at least for this year.
I would say that for my goal this year is, like I said, I'm a candidate for the Wisconsin State Senate this year. So my goal is to get elected. But so that I would say that's a very face value goal that you can look at. And so I would say that that's going to be my first thing. But my other thing is making sure that from the top of the ticket all the way down the ticket is electing good people who will truly represent the values that I believe in. Whether that be on this ballot coming up here in February for the primary, or our ballot in April, or in August, or in November. I want to make sure that we're electing those good people who are going to uphold the Constitution, uphold the values that I believe in. And right now in Wisconsin, we're in a pretty strong redistricting battle right now. Some of you may have heard about it. We're currently kind of getting our chance to make competitive maps again. And I'm looking forward to those, and I'm looking forward to putting up the best fight that we can to try and un-gerrymander our state legislature so it actually starts looking more like the people of Wisconsin, which is a purple state, not a supermajority legislature.
I quite like your goals. Thank you for sharing, guys. We have time for maybe one or two more, but Alicia has a question in chat. How do you think we can encourage more young people to run for office? What can elected officials do to encourage young people to participate? And do you have any advice maybe for young people that are here today?
So I would say that the first thing, let's take the elected official part first, is the key, and I've always believed this no matter what position I've even served in, is knowing that when you're a senior member, when to gracefully step aside and let someone else come up. Don't just step aside and leave a hole, like a vacancy. Step aside, but build up a successor, build up a plan to have a strong successor. That's key, is starting there, and that's something elected officials can do. The other thing is dampening down the rhetoric is a good place to start with getting more people who want to run for office. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the call, is you're never going to find the perfect all things candidate. And so knowing that, I think that a lot of us young people like to try and think of, like, I want to be the perfect candidate. I want to make sure I can achieve this, and this. you're gonna make mistakes, you're gonna trip, you're gonna fall, you're gonna stumble, you're gonna get back up, and you're gonna keep running. That's the thing, is I'm a first-time candidate, and there are days where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And there are days where I'm like, all right, I got this one. And sometimes those happen all in the same like span of 5 minutes. And so knowing that you're qualified if that's what you want to do, whether that's being on the ballot yourself, helping someone be on the ballot, or helping someone after they get elected, or different levels of politics, participating is the key. And to get young people involved, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to jump in. Maybe be a little bit afraid of what lies ahead, because that's what keeps you going. But don't be afraid to jump in. Don't be afraid to take the risk and take the plunge. I was helping run a mayoral campaign when we were in one of our like kitchen cabinet meetings, and I said, I think I'm going to run for Senate. And right away, my other co-campaign manager and the candidate said yes. And we were like 2 days before that election, and they're like, yes. And so now they're on my team too. And so that's how like these things work. And so advice to young people, don't be afraid, but be dedicated. Build up that ambition and just go for it. Don't let yourself talk you out of it. Just go for it and just get the job done.
Yeah, I can't agree with Collin more about just doing it and not letting fear get the best of you. I am a cautionary tale in that. I knew deep down that I wanted to be more involved than I was for a really long time, but felt like there was either no place for me, which was not true, or that there was no like it was all taken care of, because everybody at that level, who's involved in politics, whether it's at the local level, city council, all the way up to the White House, must know what they're doing. They have experience. But the truth is that nobody in politics knows what they're doing until they're doing it. Because it's not the kind of thing that you can just go and get a degree for and go to a training institute to learn how to. I mean, there's not enough of that. There's some people who may have, like done Model UN from the time that they could begin, and, always knew that they wanted to be in politics. But those people are very few and far between. So I talked myself out of it over and over and over and over again until I was nearly 40 years old. And once I said it out loud, that it was something that I wanted to do, the same thing that happened to Collin happened to me immediately. Like, I think I'm going to do this. And everybody I said it to was like, oh, finally, yes, you should do that. Like, what took you so long to say that you should do that? We think you should do it too. Like people that I really admired and looked up to, who were like in Congress, said, yeah, I mean, if it's not you, who's it going to be? I can't think of anybody who would be better for that. Which is just like, you feel, I don't want anybody to feel like the time that they kept playing that tape in their mind over and over of why they shouldn't do it. Like that's my biggest regret in life, if I have one, which I don't dwell on those kind of things. But if I were to list one, that would be it. That I didn't feel like I could, or that I didn't allow myself to when I really knew I could, but I talked myself out of it over and over. And that's really the worst thing you can do. If it helps, I think one thing to add is that people in politics in general is a field and a culture where there is really no long-term memory. I mean, except for the things that get put in the history books, or, like put on plaques in Capitol buildings and stuff. Like, if you try and it's not for you, nobody's going to sit around thinking about like, oh, remember that time that person came around and it was just a disaster. Like, nobody's thinking that. Nobody's going to be thinking that. If you try and you don't succeed, that's okay. You were part of the process. And more likely than not, you being there will have an impact, even if it's not the one that you originally intended to make. So I think it's, if there's anything to impart, It's just to echo, as I have been this whole time, what Collin has said about just doing it. You know, just put yourself out there, see what happens. Don't be afraid to take the leap. You more likely than not will be very happy that you did it. And then you won't have to regret it like I do.
Thank you both so much for your time and your answers today. We are so lucky to have you. This is one of the best panels we've had in a long time. I'm sure everyone can agree.